of the audio. So
right.
really quick,
fire it up again then.
Yeah, once again, Nate, how'd you get here? Give us equally as passionate. It's always hard to retread those steps a second time.
No problem. So like Sawyer said, my name is Nate Meeker. I'm the director of esports at the University of Akron. I've been here in my role with the program for about 4.5 years now, since the inception in late 2017. How did I get here is a little bit of a journey. So I started off with my career in education when I graduated college in 2004. I actually went to the University of Akron for my undergrad degree and went into secondary education for a bit. Esports was something I was passionate about, but 20 years ago, there was really no pathway into the field. So I followed it throughout my career. I did a couple of master's degrees in the late 2000s and transitioned into higher ed in 2010. Since then, I've done a career for just about everything in higher ed. I've done admissions, I've done recruitment, I've been a faculty member, I've done curriculum development, you name it, I've probably done it in higher ed. As are a lot of folks who work in higher ed, kind of wearing a lot of different hats. But with that, I continued to carry the passion for gaming and esports along. And then as universities started to look at building programs in kind of the mid 2000 teens there, 2015 to 2017, it was something where I was looking to maybe make a transition from where I was at the time and back to Akron, which is where I grew up. And for me, it was a kind of a dream come true to come home, build the program, do something that I was passionate about in esports, and utilize a skill that I had built over the past decade in higher education administration.
Awesome. Fantastic. And I agree. I think most people in the esports scene, I'm figuring out, kind of ended up there through a somewhat twisty and turny web. I'll also say the same for, I used to work in admissions, and a lot of people ended up in admissions. Very similar. I don't think I've met a single person that like woke up as a child and was like, man, I want to grow up and be an admissions counselor. For those who might have not liked the job, and for those who loved it, like myself. So that's awesome. One of the things that I really want to put some emphasis on during this conversation is tell us a little bit about your specific program, right? So every program is going to be a little bit different, but some programs have like pillars that they abide to that kind of like govern what they do or how they work as a team or how they communicate with communities. Other ones, maybe they have like special connections to professionals teams. Tell us a little bit about some unique things involving, your particular program, if a student was interested in wanting to know more.
Yeah, sure. So at the University of Akron, it sounds kind of weird to say, but at 4.5, 5 years old, we are one of the oldest programs in the country. And we are one of the only Division I programs kind of operating in the sense that we have 4 or 5 different peers around the country, but really none in the Midwest that operate in the same sense that we do. So the way that we approach it is kind of a threefold approach. So we do the varsity side of things where you see students getting scholarships to come and compete. We compete in 9 different games for those. We are the winningest program in the entire country. Got more titles. Students know, they want to win. They come to Akron. In addition to that, we build the community here on campus as well. So we have over 700 students that participate in the club activities. And those are club teams. Some of them are competitive games, just like the varsity titles. Others are more casual, where they're getting together and competing in games like Minecraft or Pokemon. Right. And they do different nights for those events. So it's a really cool way to connect. And then on top of that, we also have a community aspect where we integrate with curriculum and classes on campus and do community nights where we bring in folks who may not be interested in the competitive aspect of things, but they're interested in the community aspect of gaming. So we've got another 1,400 or so students that are involved in that. All in total, it's about 2,500 students on campus who participate in the esports program in one way or another.
That's impressive. So kudos. I think something that has always been interesting to people who maybe don't know as much about esports is this idea of like, oftentimes when we think of esports, we try and create, a metaphor or a comparison to more traditional sports like a football or a soccer. Something that's really interesting is when we think of the community for traditional sports, it tends to be very much like there are players and then there are viewers. And that's kind of it, right? Like you don't fans don't necessarily like hang out with the players. Like you don't see pickup games happening in professional courts. But that's a little different with esports, right? Like it almost, as the way you've described it, very much becomes like a community hub, right? Where it's less about, certainly there is the competitive nature, there is the watching and the fandom and the support and the rah-rah aspect, but it's also very much like community driven, right?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the neat things about gaming and esports is that, everyone is able to participate. There's not really a wall to it.
Right.
For myself, about 15 years ago, I ran into the wall where I'm not playing football anymore. I'm not
Right.
getting out there and padding up and going to play anymore. So at that point, you kind of transition to a viewer. With esports, it doesn't really happen. Your
Right.
skills might decline over time, or they might not be as sharp if you don't play all the time. But you can always jump in and get a game in with friends or
Right.
with folks in a space. And skill level isn't the only thing that you need to have fun in the game. There's a
Mm-hmm.
variety of different ways to engage. So in that way, yeah, you definitely get a lot more community involvement than you would with traditional sports.
Right. And even talking about skill level. So I want to go down a path of two hypothetical students. So let's say that there is just a booming star, right? I'm trying to think of a good modern esports reference, and all of mine fall back to people who have retired at this point. But let's say you just get someone who's just like, just top notch, and they are interested in esports. Like, what would be maybe your suggestion for like, if they are in high school, obviously they have pretty solid grades, whatever is necessary to succeed academically, but they are just very competitive, very engaged, very passionate about it, and they have the skills to back that up. Like, where would you suggest they first start that step? Like, where do they start even just getting involved in like trying to figure out like what programs they might be interested in, or even just like, like who do they reach out to, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So esports is a little different than traditional sports in that
Mm-hmm.
aspect. With traditional sports, you're probably looking at the Power 10 around the
Right.
country, or you're looking at Division One schools, or you're looking at strong Division Three programs who might win some national titles at that
Mm-hmm.
level. For esports, I always tell students that they need to look at academics first, because the scholarships, while they're there, are not significant in a lot of cases
Right.
unless the student is maybe willing to sacrifice educational quality to gain some scholarship dollars.
Right.
And that could be a decision that they decide to make, but definitely the education piece first. So whatever they want to study, narrow down the schools from there. So
Right.
let's say it's engineering, pick your top 10 schools, 15 schools. Of those schools, for let's call it mechanical engineering,
Mm-hmm.
which schools have an esports program? And then your search is going to be considerably narrowed from there.
Right.
Even more so if you're looking at which schools might give you a scholarship for that in the
Mm-hmm.
field of choice. And then that will really help define your career, because ultimately we're not seeing 99.9% of our student athletes in esports go professional.
Right.
If they're going to go professional, chances are they would have already done it in high school or would have already been approaching that.
Exactly.
So they need to be prepared for their career after college. And while it's certainly possible for them to win a lot of national championships, to win a lot of money, even a lot of our teams take home quite a lot of prizing throughout the
Mm-hmm.
year. It's not something that's likely to produce a career later on, where
Right.
if they're a top level recruit for football or basketball, it might.
Yeah. No, that's a good way to approach it. And I think a lot of students need to hear that. And that's something interesting too, because when we think about maybe like professional sports, like traditional professional sports, typically there's like a lot of recruitment involved, like you're on people's radars pretty significantly. And like it very much is one of those things where like if you can get your foot in the door, chances are you can ride that for a while. Very different from what we see in esports, where like if you are top quarter percent in a video game, like, and you are up there playing with other professionals consistently, like you kind of have the skills to maybe go directly into that route. Or even, although this is very much almost up to chance certainly now these days, like even going into like a streaming career or something,
Sure.
which is pretty, I would say most people agree, is maybe less about skills and more about the personality and like community you can build.
Right. And
More
your
along,
experience with it, for sure.
right,
Yeah.
more along social influencing kind of line.
Yeah,
Um,
just as an example for it. So in the last 4 years, as a program, we've won 16 national titles as a Division One school. If
right.
you can't name another Division One school
Yeah.
around the country that's won 16 titles in the last 15 years,
Right.
right? And we've got one student that's gone professional that wasn't a professional before. And so
Right.
that kind of gives you, that's how good the skill level is of the program, and that's just how hard it is to break into the pro scene for
Right.
esports.
Exactly. So that was our first hypothetical student. Let's take our second hypothetical student. Let's see that they have already decided on we'll say they've already decided to attend your university and they are interested in esports. Maybe they're pretty good, better than most, but like they're not going to be in that top tier, like we might consider like a varsity competitive level. How might they get involved in the program?
Sure. So there's a lot of different ways. We offer scholarships for students that are not on the varsity program as well. So if they're interested in the community side of things, or they're interested in the broadcasting, shoutcasting side of things, that may be an issue or an area for them to explore for some additional scholarship dollars as well.
Right.
But typically, it kind of depends on the school. Your smaller schools are most likely not going to have large community programs. The larger schools will most likely have larger community programs. So that's definitely something you should ask about. If you're going
Right.
on school tours, whether it's at Akron or a different school, especially if it's a larger D1 school, you should ask them, what does the esports program look like? How large is the club? What do they do? Because if it's not a institutionally run program like mine is,
Mhm.
they might have a club on campus. Definitely ask about it to see, how can you get involved, how easy it is. For us, it's just as simple as easy as saying like, hey, I'm interested, I want to participate. And we've got 92 computers, 30 some odd console stations, VR setups. They can come on in and use that. They can practice out of the facilities if they want. They can build their skills. Maybe they join the varsity team down the line, but
Right.
it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to get involved.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, the barrier of entry, obviously, we want to be as low as possible because the more people that know about it, the more people that are passionate about it, like those are going to be the people that fuel that aspect. So obviously, just from what you talked about, you have a lot of facilities, or you have a pretty robust facilities, we'll say, a lot of different ways for students to get involved. An interesting question that comes up a lot, and I think this is something worth talking about, because something that's different about maybe professional traditional sports that like most people are used to seeing on TV is there tend to be like, right, like the tried and trues, right? Like football's been around for a while, soccer's been around for a while. Esports, I think, has been around for a while, obviously newer, but what's different is that there are different games, right, within esports. And sometimes those games stand the test of time. Maybe they're updated frequently, rules are changed, they're reinvigorated, maybe a sequel's released. Other ones, not so much. Maybe they
Right.
drop off. And I think certainly any students or any people who played video games, whether it was professionally or not, have had that game that they loved and eventually like has dropped off the face of the planet. I'll throw myself under the bus. I love Warcraft 3. I still have Warcraft 3 installed on my computer. The only time I can ever play that game is like Friday and Saturday nights, because that seems to be when like the 500 people that actually can peel themselves away from their career or families at this point manage to play. But something that I'd be interested in hearing about is, so in your opinion, what right now are like we'll say the top 5 or so like competitive esports right now that are either really standing at the top of the totem pole or are like rapidly climbing and showing a lot of potential?
Sure. So the collegiate level and the pro level are a little bit different in that regard. In the collegiate level, the top 5, number 1 right now, rising like a superstar, is Valorant.
Right.
We're seeing more and more students every day. The skill level is getting higher across the board. That's definitely the number 1. The other top 4 is probably not quite as clear. Rocket League is always a good number 2, number 3. A lot of students interested in Valorant. Actually, the collegiate scene for Valorant is just about as big as the professional scene is.
Right.
Teams are comparable. Prize pools are comparable in a lot of instances. That would be a number 2 or number 3. We still get quite a bit of interest in Overwatch as well, despite the potential format change here pretty soon.
Yeah.
So probably 1, 2, and 3 in no particular order: Rocket League, Valorant, and Overwatch. Then the other two, it kind of depends on the timing, honestly.
Right.
So we get a lot of interest in Rainbow Six Siege. We get a lot of interest in League of Legends. We
Mhm.
get a lot of interest in Fortnite. We get a lot of interest in Call of Duty. We get some interest
Right.
in Counter Strike. It kind of depends. But if I had to pick two to
Mhm.
go with, it would probably be League of Legends in the top four somewhere. And then for us in particular at Akron, probably Rainbow Six Siege, which we get a lot of interest in.
All right.
But
So
it
here,
flexes for sure.
right, and it does, and games can even go like I mentioned the games kind of disappearing, but games can also surge in and out. Like you just depending on what the particular I guess that's another interesting difference when we think about like esports versus maybe traditional like sports is that like esports are very heavily dependent on these creators, right? Like how much are they actually supplementing their game? How much are they supporting the community? Things along those lines. Whereas like, for American football, you have, the NFL. And that's pretty much it. Like, and it is built up such a self-sustaining system that like it doesn't plan on ever going away. But like, turn back the time to like 2010 2011ish, like starcraft 2 was just coming out and blowing up and kind of picking up a lot of where starcraft 1 left off. Nowadays most starcraft 2 professional players have transitioned to other things, whether it's just streaming or overwatch or other blizzard games. But even then, some made that jump to heroes of the storm, and that has fallen away now. So it is really interesting in that sense that it's dynamic. You're always seeing something new. Along those lines, are there any esport games that are kind of like on your peripheries right now that you wish had a little bit more attention? Either they might pick up a little bit more steam, or like, even if it's completely unrealistic, you just wish you saw them more in the collegiate scene.
Yeah. So honestly, for us, I think the biggest it's not really a title, it's more of a genre.
Mm-hmm.
So for us, we see a ton of interest in the battle royale genre,
right?
And we scholarship some folks for Fortnite, and we do a lot of activity for games like Warzone and Apex, but the developer support for the competitive collegiate level for those games hasn't really been there. And honestly, they haven't really been there at the professional level, if you want to call it that either.
Right.
No one can really figure out the formula to make Battle Royale work as an esport.
Right.
And when they can, I think that's where we're really going to see a huge influx of players coming into esports if they can make a Battle Royale work correctly. Because, as you mentioned, StarCraft, if you are probably in your late 20s to early 30s, the games that you grew up playing were RTS games,
right?
Which led right into League of Legends, which is one of the reasons why League of Legends is as popular as it is right now. For us, that cycle right now is battle royales.
Right.
We're getting middle school, high school students that are growing up with games like Fortnite, but we don't have a good competitive battle royale esport. As soon as that happens, I think that's what I'm looking for. Other than that, you're always going to have the cycle of some RTS games, some shooting games.
Right.
Right now, it looks like Microsoft is doing some good things with Halo, but we'll kind of have to wait and see.
Yeah, that it is interesting because I had never thought about that, because Battle Royale certainly is vastly popular. For anybody watching this who might not know like what a Battle Royale is, if we had to break it down, typically some common cultural references you might hear is like Hunger Games, right? So like people are dropped off in an arena to varying degrees of equipment. Maybe you find different weapons or items along the way. You continue to battle. Sometimes the field might change. Sometimes it might just be the players. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there can only be one. Or if you're playing duo, maybe two. But you're on the same team. And it is interesting because that is so widely popular, but I hadn't thought about the fact that like it is hard to make an esport, right? There's a lot of randomness in it with like, where you're going to find things, what's going to spawn. I also think it's a particularly frustrating game, right? If you've been training a lot and you have like a one shot to make something happen and you drop and you just happen to get unlucky and maybe 2 or 3 people pile on top of you, and then all of a sudden like, man, that's demoralizing. It's hard to invest time in that.
Yeah, it's the part of the players, and then the other part of it is the spectator part too, where none
Right.
of them are good to watch as an esport. Where if you're looking at Valorant, Counter Strike, League of Legends, these are good games to watch. It's fun to be a
Right.
spectator for those games. Battle Royale is not that.
Right. I was about to say you have everything from either people doing what might be sound strategies to win, but are not enjoyable to watch, such as like hiding in a building,
Right.
or alternatively, something that I think a lot of people don't think about is, when you are watching a traditional sports game, you have a bird's eye view and you can pretty much see everything that's going on for the most part. Like even soccer, as large as soccer or football might be, like if you zoom out enough, you can see the little people running around. But for a video game, like you really focus on usually like one person's perspective, or as much as you can fit in a computer screen, so to speak. And like when there's one person, two people, maybe there's 5 versus 5, like you can switch pretty easily. But when you have a battle royale where there's 64 people dropping, how do you prioritize where you end up showing that action? That is something that is, once again, like a pretty stark difference between the professional sports world, and also something that, once again, I've never thought about that much because I don't watch a lot of battle royales competitively. I might watch a one person playing them, so you're watching from their point of view. But I certainly remember even when I would see maybe like a Fortnite, I remember thinking like it's really hard to focus because nothing, as a viewer, nothing sadder than like you wanting to watch the person you're rooting for, and worst case scenario, they die off screen and you don't even know why. Like they're like up and Sawyer was eliminated. And you're like, wait, what? Like he was my guy. So I do think that's a really interesting thing. One thing I want to do at these, and I want to be mindful of time, so I'm going to transition really quickly to some questions. And some of these we've covered just in our brief conversation. And any of these topics, of course, we could talk for hours about, even what we've talked about already. But there's 2 questions in particular I want to run by you. The first one comes from, Google, data analytics, research, trends, that kind of thing. Above and beyond, one of the most popular questions we see people Googling is, what are esports, right? What is an esport? So there's probably as many definitions for this as there are people who enjoy the content. But for you, what is your definition when you're thinking about like an esports kind of system or just an esport?
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it just breaks down to a way to test yourself or to test your team against other individuals or teams playing that game in an electronic format. That's really all it is. You could take it and say, it has to be a team sport. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think it's just you testing your skills against another individual or another set of individuals.
Right. Which I think when we boil down sports, a lot of people agree with that, because certainly there are some sports that are very much traditional, like, oh, you keep using football and soccer. And then there are maybe sports on the periphery that some people would consider sports, but maybe are a little bit different. We'll take racing, right? Formula One or NASCAR. Certainly is physically exhausting and requires skill, but not in the same way we maybe think of like a football game. Or even like the classic, is chess a sport, right? Like, are you physically exhausting yourself in the sense that your muscles are doing a lot of work? Maybe not, but certainly there's a lot of mental activity going on there. There's certainly a lot of strategy. And depending on, same thing with esports, depending on whatever that tertiary sport might look like, a lot of endurance. Because like, it's one of those things where obviously growing up, RTS, like, were really big for my generation, what I really enjoyed. And like, sometimes you're sitting there for 40 straight minutes using every neuron in your skull to try and micromanage and macro manage, 60 odd things at once. And like, it is exhausting. Anybody who hasn't had to do something like that, it's like herding cats. But if there's just 60 cats and you're like, I am so overwhelmed. But I do agree. I think that a lot of people are beginning to move to the idea of like do you have a skill or talent that requires honing and practice and maybe training? And can you levy that against another individual in some form of competition?
Yeah, I think competition versus athletic endeavor is probably the best way to draw the line, where a sport, probably by definition has to have some athletic endeavor to it.
Right.
Therefore, racing is probably not a sport, it's a competition.
Right.
Golf is probably not a sport, it's a competition.
Mm-hmm.
Esports is probably not a sport, it's a competition. But I don't know if we call it e-competition. That just kind of sounds
it doesn't sound as good. Right. It's hard to market that. Awesome. So the final question I have that I want to get across here, because I know this is something that a lot of people who aren't familiar with esports or video games or maybe online competitions, one of the most common trends we see when we're talking about searches are esports real sports? And so I think this kind of goes along the lines with like, what is esports? And we kind of talked on that, but I want to hone in on that question specifically. And maybe what would you say to somebody who's asking that question, right? Like, is an esport a real sport?
So in a lot of aspects, yes. So if you look at the traditional schedule of a professional esports player or somebody at the college level, it reflects what our professional athletes are doing in terms of training, in terms of preparation for games, in terms of team preparation, in terms of individual preparation, practice, and performance. It mirrors it very similarly, much more so than I think a lot of things that we consider sports do.
Right.
However, it doesn't have the athletic component. It has the focus component. It has the preparation, the mental fortitude component, but it doesn't have the athletic component. So if you feel like you have to include the athletic component for it to be a sport, then no, it's probably not a sport. But in a lot of instances, sure. And my response is usually, look at what the folks, come and watch what our varsity folks are doing. Right. And they're going to be doing very similar things to the varsity football team and the basketball team on campus. Maybe not quite as intensive on the athletic side of things, but the training level is still there. And in that aspect, it very much is a competitive activity.
Right. I think that's a good way to look at it, is take a step back and say, okay, like, I'm not going to tell you whether it's a real sport or not. You see what they're putting in there, right. The effort, the passion, the practice, the time, the resources. And you can kind of define your own definition. Is it a sport or not by your thoughts? Awesome. Well, as I said at the very beginning, I could talk about any of these for hours. I know you could as well, but I want to keep this to about 30 minutes to be respectful of time and also just for viewers and the YouTube channel. So I have on the channel, will be in the description, and also right now on the screen beneath your name, there are the esports social media, the Twitter, the Twitch, and also the Discord. Where can people find more of you if they want to hear more from Nate Meeker? Is there personal social media? Do you just reference back to those esports channels? Where can people get more of this if they want it?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, uakron.edu/esports got all the contact info right there. Feel free to reach out. Happy to answer any questions. Outside of that, most of our content is on Zips Esports at Twitch, Zips Esports at Twitter. A lot of good content areas there. But yeah, if anyone wants to chat, uakron.edu/esports, you'll find the contact info there.
Awesome. Similarly, if you have any questions about this, if you're watching this live or if you're watching it a month from now on YouTube and you have questions, feel free to shoot them my direction, because that can be a whole nother video down the line of like, what do people actually want to know? What are questions we didn't have time to get to? All that kind of stuff. But otherwise, you can find most of Virtual College Counselor stuff on the screen. We were lucky enough that there aren't a lot of social medias with virtual college counselors, so we got that pretty much everywhere. But Nate, I really want to thank you for your time, for sharing a little bit about your story, also for some interesting insights on sports and development and what programs look like. Hopefully we'll chat again in the future, but for now, any final words to any parents or students that might be watching that are interested in just learning more about esports?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there are opportunities out there. Do your homework. There are a lot of great opportunities out there, and there's a lot of predatory opportunities out there as well. So make sure you listen to your counselors, do your homework, and just check up on the program that you're interested in joining.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Nate. Thanks everybody for watching, whether it be live or later on YouTube. Reach out to us, show some love to Nate, Akron, Zips Esports, all that kind of stuff, all that good stuff. But otherwise, we're going to go ahead and call it here. So thanks for stopping by. Have a good evening, good day, good afternoon, wherever you are in the timeline.